Greetings, 5th grade, from Atkinson Farms in Spring, Texas. They have strawberries here that you can actually come out and pick. So we are starting our unit on food chains and food webs. And so one thing that's important to remember is that all food chains always start with the sun. They always get their energy from the sun. Everything gets their energy from the sun. So whether it's us, whether it's animals, everything ultimately started with the sun. And see, the sun gives, of course, sunlight to plants. And so the plants that we're talking about are kind of like the strawberries that you see behind me. So boys and girls, here we have strawberry plants, and they get sunlight, and they use that sunlight as part of a process to make their own food called photosynthesis. Here we have some strawberries right here that you see right there. And of course, when we're talking about any plants, they do need bees for pollinating. And so in the life cycle of a strawberry, you do have the flower that comes out, and out of that flower you can see right in there, I'll zoom that in, you can see the little baby strawberry coming out. And of course, eventually it does turn in to strawberries that we can eat like that.
Hi, 5th grade. Strawberries make their own food using sunlight. Bye, 5th grade.
Hi, 5th grade. I hope you enjoyed that video of the strawberry farm. This week and next week, we're going to be learning about food chains and food webs, and really kind of focusing in on the fact that all energy comes from the sun. And so the first thing we're going to be talking about is how in the world does all that energy that we have come from the sun? I mean, think about it. You know, we don't go around munching on some sunlight. It just doesn't make any sense. And you don't see plants just, kind of eating sunlight, or animals eating sunlight, or anything like that. And so, let's think about how in the world that happens. First thing we need to think about, is food chains. And you have to remember, plants, they're going to have to be able to get energy from somewhere. Plants are not able to just get up and move and eat things. That's just not how producers work. You remember that producers are going to be making their own food. But to do that, they really need to go ahead and make sure that they have sunlight. So the plants are going to take in sunlight. And then in a food chain, you've got like the grasshoppers that in this food chain that could eat the grass. Then later on, you have a toad there that could end up eating the grasshopper. You have the snake that ends up eating the toad, and then you have the hawk that flies down and eats the snake. So eventually, that hawk's going to die, and bacteria and different decomposers will break that down into the soil. And of course, grass and other plants love to have good soil, so then it kind of starts over again. And so remember that the energy from all of this did end up coming from the sun. So yes, the grasshopper got energy from the grass, but remember that energy is the same energy that started all with the sun right there. So that energy goes here, then here, then here, then here, then here, down here, and then back to the into the soil. And then remember that the sun will continue to send energy down. So one thing that we learn about in 5th grade is that, we don't just do food chains. We also have a series of food chains that kind of interconnect, that kind of mesh together and make what we call a food web. And so, the important thing to remember is that there's not only one animal that consumes that grass. Okay, there are lots of different animals that may consume that grass, or nuts, or acorns, or whatever. Okay, and so that's kind of how they interconnect. Same thing like with coyotes. Coyotes don't just eat mice. There are other things that they eat as well. And so those arrows and those lines kind of mesh together and they kind of go all over the place. So in this food web, you have the mouse right there, and you have to think about it. The snake could eat the mouse, the coyote could eat the mouse. Okay, the hawk that we have there could eat the mouse. Okay, but let's remember that it doesn't make any sense for the flower to eat the mouse. That would not happen. The mouse is eating the flower. So we always have to think, what would make sense. In this case, the deer would never eat the snake. That doesn't make sense. The coyote would not eat the snake. And so uh, we always have to think what would be happening in nature. So definitely a coyote could track down the deer and could end up eating the deer. And so that is something that would make sense in nature because, as we know, deer are herbivores. They don't eat meat, they only eat plants. So, but in all of this, no matter who eats what, all of the energy came from the sun. Okay. So, no matter who eats what, that energy ultimately started at the sun. Here again, last week we did talk about photosynthesis some, and just remember that the plants are going to use sunlight along with carbon dioxide and water, and they're going to output oxygen that we really like to breathe, as well as animals. Along with, they're going to make their own sugar, and that sugar that they make is called glucose. It's a type of sugar. Uh, and so again, but we remember that plants, they do get their energy from the sun. Okay. And that energy, when a plant is eaten, does transfer to the organism that eats it, the herbivore. Okay. All right. So we talked about last week some, herbivores are your plant eaters, carnivores are your meat eaters, and omnivores eat both plants and animals. Also, we have decomposers like bacteria and fungi. They break down dead organisms and their waste to go ahead and get energy. So think about it. We really do need decomposers because without them, it would just you wouldn't have the good soil that we need to have good plants. Okay. Uh, Also, another thing that we need to discuss, boys and girls, is that food web needs to be balanced. If you have too many of one organism, things will kind of get crazy. For example, if I'm thinking one thing I know there's a state park south of Houston called Brazos Bend, and at Brazos Bend, they have a lot of deer. And so, what they have in the fall during hunting season, sometimes they close the park down in order to have hunters come in and hunt deer. And the reason why is because, natural predators of deer like coyotes and other organisms, there's not a lot of natural predators of deer there. And so, they have hunters come in because the numbers of deer get so high and almost like a nuisance. And so the hunters come in and, the deer population gets lowered. And so it's in a good balance for that ecosystem. So the key thing is you want to think of balance. You don't want to have things get out of balance because when they're out of balance, the ecosystem is not being successful. So, another thing that that happens sometimes is wildfires, and wildfires obviously are going to go ahead and consume pretty much everything in their path as far as vegetation and plants. And so, when those plants get consumed, boys and girls, by the fire, that messes up everything for the animals that eat those grasses. So those are important things to remember is that food webs have to be balanced. Now, so the next thing that we're going to look at, boys and girls, is that we have a Rocky Mountain food chain here. And so, right here you have sunlight that gives the energy to the huckleberry plant. And then the huckleberries go ahead and they get eaten by the grizzly bear. And so the energy, as I've written down on the arrows, the energy goes ahead and transfers from the sun to the huckleberries to the grizzly bears. And so a lot of times fifth graders think that the arrow means something gets eaten. We don't want to think of it that way. We want to think of it as the energy gets transferred from one thing to another. Because remember that these huckleberries, they don't eat the sun. Okay, so that's why we don't say that it's something getting eaten. We say that the energy gets transferred. Well, fifth grade, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that this helps to make some sense out of food chains and food webs. And I'll be seeing you around. Bye bye.